At $200, a Super Nintendo setup costs twice as much as the old system. For the money, the company promises better pictures, sound, and adventure. Now you're playing with power, superpower. You're the king, I tell you! The king!
Only for Super NES.
Only on Super NES.
You're listening to the SNES podcast with your host, Soulblazer.
Hello, everybody. This is Super NES Podcast, episode number 246. These are your hosts, as always. I'm Greg. He is Joe.
Hello.
And this time, we're looking at another wrestling game on the podcast. I figured I'd throw Joe a bone for some of the other games we've done recently in recent months, and just have easier and lighter games for us to cover toward the end of the year when things really get crazy busy in real life and whatnot for both of us. So I lost track of how many wrestling games we've done before on the podcast already, but it's a lot. So we're running out of wrestling games actually released in the States. I think this may be either the last or one of the last U.S. released wrestling games on the system. So there's still a bunch more of it. There's a bunch more of we covered the Japanese side of things, which I probably will eventually, because I think you mentioned before in the past, Joe, there's one or two wrestling games that were Japan only that you think are really good. So I'm sure we'll get to some of those eventually at some point.
Yeah, and actually this game actually had me touch on one of those games, so yes, okay. Absolutely.
Well, this game was released in Japan, which we'll talk about here in just a moment here. We're covering Hammerlock Wrestling, which is developed and published by Jalco, which came out in Japan originally in September 1994, and very quickly, probably because very little translation was needed, came out in North America just about a month later, in October '94. Mm-hmm. Did not come out in Europe. Yeah, I imagine the English in this game probably was present in the Japanese version of the game as well. I didn't look at the Japanese version specifically to check, but there's not much text in this game anyway. So any translation they had to do, I'm sure is very quick. Hence the very quick turnaround time for getting things published. Which in the old days that was much more longer, months if not years later process where that actually happened. Right. But in Japan, this was actually a licensed game. In Japan, this was called Tenryu Genkichiro no Pro Wrestling Revolution, named for a very famous wrestler in Japan at the time, who I think is pronounced I'll try it, Genichiro Shimadara, who's also known as Genichiro Tenryu. When he was wrestling at the time, one of the most famous pro wrestlers in Japan. So, and many of the wrestlers in the roster of the Japanese game were licensed, and they also in the Japanese version of the game also had music playing in the matches, which for some reason was removed for the North American version. I don't know why it was taken out, rights reasons, perhaps. Maybe.
That's what I was thinking, because that was one discrepancy I saw in that as well.
Yeah, I don't know why they replaced. Yeah, I don't know why. I'm not sure why they didn't replace the music with music of something. You get the impression that this was a very quick and dirty translation / release job from Japan to the U.S.
I was going to say, there's a lot of questions I have about this game.
So, even though this game lost the license, obviously, because the license would only have been about Japan, only the wrestlers there. You can clearly tell. I can clearly tell, and I know much less about wrestling than Joe does. I can tell that there's a number of wrestlers in this game who are inspired by actual popular wrestlers of the time periods. There's no names, but you can just tell based on the looks and the moves they use and whatnot that this is it's clearly supposed to be somebody else.
And especially the details like height and weight that also gives it away as well. So
according to the research I found, the wrestlers who were inspired by for this game included Lex Luger, Hulk Hogan, Abdullah the Butcher, Road Warrior Hawk, Yokozuna, and Stan Henson. And there probably may be others beyond that. That was just the ones I found by doing research on this.
So I'll also add to that because I have the full list. So on top of those, you had the Great Muda, also, Genjiro Tenryo, and there was Shinya Hashimoto and Mitsura Masawa, Jumbo Sarada, and I'm sure I butchered that name, and Kenji Moto, and they all were part of the War organization, which is what this game is based on, which stands for Wrestling and Romance.
I actually have never heard of that. Yeah, I actually have never heard of that before.
So they went defunct in 2000.
Okay.
They burned hot and bright. Went from 1992 to 2000, and then it died. But some notable wrestlers came out of War. You had Chris Jericho there wrestling under the name Lionheart. Rey Mysterio Jr. was there. Chris Benoit was there wrestling under a mask as Wild Pegasus. Jushin Thunder Liger was there. Ultimo Dragon. King Haku did a stint there. Chavo Guerrero Sr., which is Eddie's uncle. Eddie Guerrero, that is. And then Undertaker and Ric Flair actually had matches as part of the WWF in 1993 in that promotion, which actually ended up being a handshake agreement to where WWF was financed by War in 1994 to run a Japanese tour. And I think that's how some of these likenesses ended up in the Japanese game.
That
and
makes
then
sense.
why it had to be changed for this North American release.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. But obviously Joe is wrestling expert here, so I appreciate the
Yeah, and I was going to say, I swear that's all the wrestling stuff I'm going to talk about. Other than the mechanics of the game.
Well, let's get into those mechanics, real quick, because in a nutshell, this game reminds me of several other wrestling games. It's not pure wrestling because there is fighting involved in this as well too.
Yeah,
kind of reminds me about a cross up between kind of mashup like from WWF wrestling games, and while also having something in common with Capcom's Saturday Night Slam matches, which was the last wrestling game we covered on the podcast some months ago. There is actually a lot to like in this game as far as the deepness of it, as far as the deepness of the game goes. The roster's pretty good. There's pretty good, like 12 wrestlers. There's 60 moves to pick from, which is to pick from this game, including the titler Hammerlock, which they renamed this game for its North American release. And there's also a unique finisher for each wrestler. So the options menu, the main options menu is also surprisingly robust, for a wrestling game. I was surprised to see how many options there actually are here, because you have 4 modes to play in. You have the exhibition match, which allows you to play up to 4 people if you have a we had to have a 4-player adapter. I don't remember. Was that the actual name? I'm trying to remember what the actual name of that device was.
It's a multi-tap.
The multi-tap, yeah. So,
yep.
And in this mode, you either can wrestle 1-on-1, or you can also play the tap. Where you do it it's also part of a tag team. Very simple matches, 1 fall only. This is a good multiplayer mode to play with friends, or whatnot. Champion League mode allows up to 6 players to compete in a league, and you're trying to get points. So if you lose a match is not the end of the world, as long as you can come back and score enough points the rest of your matches, they can still win. Points determined upon how well you do. A pin or submission earns you 5 points. A ring out earns you 3 points. A draw equals 2 points, and a loss on a loss is none. So you basically just wrestle everybody else in the league until everybody's had a chance to fight, and then whoever has the most points win. This is actually a pretty good warm up to the game, I thought, because It's shorter than the other mode options. It's also like a good way to learn how to be able to do all the different things in the game relatively well.
Yeah.
Then you have tournament match, which is basically up to 8 players can compete. It's more of a glorified champion league match. It's like the full thing. So think about elimination. If you lose a match, you're out. Is one of the biggest differences here. There's also no time limit, and you're also allowed to watch computer wrestlers fight, which is a nice touch. Not many other wrestling games. Not many sports games at this time period gave you that watch computer option. So it is interesting. So it is interesting to see that. And then finally, you have top ranking match, which is the default. You pick a wrestler and you fight everybody else. You in the game, play the game, try to like win it all mode. Yeah. So, and then on top of that, for the options, you're able to do either one-on-one match or single match or tag match. You could do human or computer matchups, like any combination that you want. You can set time limits. And there's actually like 4 difficulty levels in this game, 1 being the easiest and 4 being the hardest. And finally, the game has a password system, which again, not many sports games this time period had. You had a password system. They either usually had a battery or nothing at all. So
yeah.
Again, I was surprised when I got into this. There's actually a lot of options here for a wrestling game. Probably one of the most diverse things I've seen in a wrestling game up to this point, I believe. So, that's all in the game's favor. But, by the way, the manual for this game is a hoot to read because it's like very like in your face, kind of like teenish, aggressive sounding writing. So, it definitely is one of the more interesting Super NES manuals I've looked at.
Yeah, I happened to look at an image of the inside of the manual. It definitely looks like it's supposed to be like a wrestler cutting a promo on you as it's explaining how to play the game, which is fantastic. So, okay. So now I've actually set the groundwork in the background, of everything you do in this game. Joe, since I know since it was our first time for both of us playing this game, because I didn't know it existed until recently. Why don't you actually talk about the actual gameplay itself and how it plays and what you thought of it? Yeah. So I mean, this is almost a wrestling purist dream here with this game. There's a wide variety of slams, suplexes, holds, martial arts kicks. You can pretty much do almost anything. There's even a set of aerial moves that you could do, such as moonsaults and leg drops from the top rope. And one of the things that really shocked me, and I didn't do it in my gameplay, but I saw it in a Let's Play on YouTube. There's like dirty tactics in this game, so you can actually get a foreign object when the ref's back is turned and actually use it, which I thought was a nice touch and definitely something that you didn't see in wrestling games of this time period.
There was a little bit of it in the old NES wrestling game. A couple of the wrestlers that game had legal moves they could use. Which are very powerful, but if the ref saw you do it, you really stood a chance of being disqualified. But I agree with you. For a game to have this time period is like it's very, very rare because they wouldn't use this again until some of the more WWF wrestling games came out later on for PlayStation, I think, probably. So,
I know Raw and Royal Rumble allowed you to at least pick up a chair on the outside.
Okay.
And you could use it during the match. Most of the time it wasn't a disqualification. I don't know if that's a programming flaw, like they couldn't figure out how to do like a disqualification or something. I don't know, but they just kind of let you go ham with it. But yeah, so the gameplay here, it's a mix of, your different types of grapples, your strikes, and then, like I said, you can do aerial moves, which again still kind of blows my mind because you barely got elbows from the top rope in the WWF games, which only came out, I think, maybe a year or so after this.
Yeah.
So other than that, the gameplay can be kind of slow at times. My biggest gripe with the game was I felt every time you took a move that you like left off your feet, you were pretty much taking a nap on the mat for X amount of time. Like, it just always ended up that way. I also felt the grappling was kind of hit or miss as far as connecting with your opponent. And I also think, like, when you get into a grapple to try to, like, do other button combinations to do a suplex or whatever, I felt like the mechanic might be time-based, kind of like Fire Pro Wrestling.
Okay.
So Fire Pro Wrestling is very much a purist, like, wrestling game. Japanese people love their Fire Pro, but so do we here in America, since we've been able to experience it. It's very methodical. It's very, like, you have to think about, like, the timing of your button presses, or the move's just not going to work. And I kind of felt like that might be kind of how this was, but I honestly did not put enough time and effort to figure out whether that was the case or not. I really went in kind of button mashing to kind of experience everything. So that being said, I can't say, that it's a horrible game, because I don't think that's the case. I just think that it's a slower pace. I think with some time and learning all the mechanics, I think there's a really good wrestling game here. My biggest gripes overall, we'll touch on when we get into, like, the visual presentations and graphics, but yeah, like, just kind of foreshadow. The game is split up into 3 sections.
We can talk about it now. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Because
Yeah,
the interface of this game is very unique. It's kind of hard to. So we'll do the best we can to explain how the interface is set up, like how the actual like screen looks. But it's very hard to describe by words alone, because it's like a very unique look. I'll give it that much. I can't say I've ever seen a game before that plays like this before. But yeah, go ahead.
The way I described it was a anime style kind of cinematic,
sure.
while you're wrestling, or a manga come to life, because there are, like, little panels. So you have a top panel that shows the moves that your wrestler is doing, like, and whenever you do anything, whether it's a kick, a punch, a body slam, whatever, it, like, focuses on that block, and there's an animation for it. In the middle, you have the action in the ring, and then below will either A, have your opponent when he's doing moves to you, or B, have the crowd cheering. And all the animations are fantastic. That is one of the things I love about this game. The problem I have with it is each little layer is like 1.5 inches, 2 inches. So you kind of get lost in everything that's going on around, to where you're not always paying attention to what's happening in the ring to your guy. So that was fun. Like, there were a few times.
There's a great way, to me at least, there's a great way to summarize this, because this game, the reason that you just talked about, this game I think is great to watch somebody else play, but it's very hard to play yourself, because there's so much going on.
Yeah. When you do a computer versus computer match, it's fantastic, because you can just pay attention to, like, the top and the bottom bars with the animations, and it's great. Like, it's storytelling. Like, they're actually, focusing on the storytelling of the professional wrestling that's happening in the ring, which is fantastic, because that's what most professional wrestling fans, that's what they're there for. Like, that's the action in the ring, but it's the story they're telling in the ring.
And that's what many wrestling games do nowadays, too.
Yes. So this went the total opposite direction I was expecting. Like, the minute I booted it up and got into a match, and it had, like, those 3 setups, and I was just sitting there like, okay, I'm controlling the guy in the middle. Like, what is going on the top and bottom until I punched the guy. Then I realized, and I was like, oh, okay. So thankfully I have a very large TV. So in all actuality, those bars were probably about 5 inches each. So that was nice. But yeah, it's really cool to see. I love the animations. I can't say enough about the animations. It is really good. But I do feel that the gameplay suffers because of the cut in the screen. Like, I think if they could have done something where, like, you have, maybe if it's just even smaller bars on the top and bottom, just make that playfield a little bit bigger. And then when a big moves happens, like where you're like doing a running clothesline or like you're doing a giant German suplex, like those moments, then like cut to like a full screen animation. You know what I mean? Where like it shows the action happening.
Yeah, they do that somewhat because there are certain moves that cause
Correct.
They cause the actual playing area to expand 2/3 of the screen instead. But,
right. And I couldn't figure out what moves actually did that. But
I couldn't either. Certain moves are big enough in the game's eyes for them to do that.
Yeah, it was all accidental for me. I think overall, I enjoyed the experience. Like I said, I think if I studied the game and broke it down and learned how to play it like I did Fire Pro, I probably would enjoy it a lot more than I did. I can't say that I hated it. I did enjoy it. I think the biggest thing, other than obviously the screen being split and everything else, that I can deal with, it's the mediocre sound.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, no music. Like, why music of all things? Like, how hard was it to, okay, we have a license for this music in the Japan version. That makes sense. Okay, well, change the music or alter it so that you can use it in the US version. And also, like, the crowd noises are just kind of meh. And then when you hit someone, like, it just sounds muffled. Like, I don't know, it didn't work for me. Like, it's not so bad it's annoying, but it's also not inspiring at all. It's just there.
I would agree with like most of that. So what music there is in the game sounds good. The only music in the game really is just like with the title screen, the main menu and whatnot. So,
I was going to say that the title screen and the main menu, that music is fantastic. Yeah. Absolutely.
So I thought the sound effects were fine. I didn't really hate them as much as you did, but they get the job done. They sound like wrestling games, so I was okay with that. But overall, that one point aside, I agree with you about 95% of everything that you just said as far as the game goes, because the game is very unique because that play style and then play style like that 3-bar split screen thing. So just because I have a big TV set now, trying to play this back in the 90s on your typical 19-inch television set must have been much more frustration exercise for sure. Yeah. But graphically, I agree with you. Graphically, this game is great. The models themselves, the wrestlers, the referee, the referee, like are big and detailed and involved. The crowd shots look great. There actually is like different animation on each person. So, like it's a very distinctive style. Yeah, graphically, this game is very impressive. So that's what I said. Like the cutscenes matching the action is also very well done. And for all those reasons that I said that this game is very fun to watch, but it does take a while for it to be running. And I think I think it also causes some slowdown and some sluggishness on the system because of all that animation being present and running it so high. I think that made so I think that's the reason that's the reason I attributed at least to some of the issues you had with some of the collision detection like and whatnot. Because it's like I think
and that makes sense.
The process is probably just a split second behind trying to register the hit because of everything else going on here like in the game. So so the actual gameplay, like I said, reminds me a lot like a WWF like Royal Rumble crossed with some elements from like with Saturday Night Slam Masters. Yeah. So, it definitely is a very unique game to play because of all that for sure. So, and like I said, a lot of options available to you on the menu screen, like 4 different ways to play, like 4 different levels password system. So, it definitely is certainly is one of the most robust wrestling games. I would have liked to have seen this kind of animation style and this kind of options on a different wrestling game, like Royal Rumble, for example, and seeing what could have happened as the bastardized baby of those products. But
yeah, for sure.
Because if you know what you're doing, the actual game itself is not that long. It's like, the tournament, what was it called again? The top ranked match single mode for 12 wrestlers. They don't take like half an hour, like give or take, to go through.
Yeah.
So the other modes can be a bit longer, but still, it's like the faster system is nice to include, but I think that it really doesn't feel needed for most of the options. It is nice to have. Don't get me wrong. It is nice to have it here, but yeah. So all in all, this game clearly was tailored for and definitely made for a Japanese audience. It's like, of course, a lot of games are made for the Japanese audience first and foremost. But,
right.
But this game in particular is aimed toward the Japanese style wrestling with Japanese wrestlers because it was licensed in Japan. Yeah. Done with that anime style, Magna style, as you mentioned, cutscenes and animations, and just like, Jalico decided to just do a quick and dirty. It feels like they did a quick and dirty edit job on this game to release it in the States. Without really changing too much about it. So, I definitely applaud them for it. It's a very unique game. It stands out from the other wrestling games here at the time period, but, very little attention was paid to this game when it came out. There was only one major publication time that even talked about it. The print run looks by all accounts, the print run was small. I found out online. Even though wrestling was very popular at this time period, there were other wrestling games in the system already out at this time period. Right. Because I think because it was very Japanese-ish in style. Jalico probably didn't think it was going to be like a big hit. They just wanted to make some money off the game, so they just did a quick and dirty job on it. Did a small print run for the States, and that was it. So we'll talk about it more when we get into pricing. But considering how uncommon this game is, the price is still pretty cheap to get this game in a physical cart.
Okay.
Probably because of the fact that, again, nobody really knows about it.
Yeah. So I also saw that it had a low print run, so I was assuming prices would be pretty high. And, as you know, I don't like to look at the pricing before we do the podcast, so that's actually quite surprising. Yeah, I agree. Down and dirty is definitely how this was done. Which for Jalico kind of is surprising. I've always felt that they kind of put out good stuff. But I get it. Like you said, it wasn't going to sell because it wasn't WCW. It wasn't WWF. So they slapped a wrestling name on it, a wrestling move name at that, to identify that it was clearly wrestling. And basically just kind of went for it and threw it out there and said, whatever money we made our money in Japan, and this is just extra.
Yeah. Yeah, so as far as the game itself goes, as far as recommending it or not, I'll share my thoughts first. And, of course, Joe, because your background and whatnot, you're probably going to have a different take on this. But if the game was any other kind of wrestling game with these options, with this moveset, with these wrestlers, but did not have these 3 bars of animation slowing things down, I would say this would be a great wrestling game to pick up and play for anybody trying to get into wrestling, because, like I said, it's a very robust option menu. Difficulty levels are good. They allow you to they give you a challenge. Like I said, great move set, good set of wrestlers. The only thing holding that down is because that very slow, sluggish gameplay and marked by the 3 bars of animation always going on the screen at one time. So because of that, I'd have to say, if you are a wrestling fan, by all means, check this game out, because it definitely is a very underrated classic game. I wouldn't go as far as to say it's a gem, but definitely is it definitely deserves more attention than I think it's gotten for sure. Because it's a very unique, interesting study in trying to how to do a game on the Super NES.
Yeah.
And if you're a wrestling fan, I think it's enough here to recommend this game for sure. I'm not the biggest wrestling game fan, but I did have some fun with this. But for me, the game is fun despite the issues, not because of everything else going on here.
Right.
I found as fun as it is to watch, trying to play the game trying to play the game with those 3 bars are going on, and your eyes are always being distracted, going up and down and left to right, trying to see what's going on, everything else, and so on. It makes a very confusing experience at points, especially at the higher difficulty matches. But if you're not a wrestling fan, for those reasons, I'd say leave this one alone. There are other good wrestling games. The system that you can play. If you just want to experience a typical 16-bit wrestling game of this time period. But if you are a wrestling fan, and you can not play this game, I definitely recommend giving it a shot at least. Maybe it's your style, maybe it's not. It certainly would take a certain kind of person, I think, to get used to it and actually enjoy it for a long time. But and multiplayer, again, like most things we say about multiplayer, also enhances the value of it for sure. I read when I research. I read many nostalgia comments from people saying that they say I play this game with friends or relatives or whatnot, and they had a blast with it, usually laughing the whole time through because it's very silly and over the top in places for sure. Right. So I definitely can get that, but so like I said, very curious design choice here of the graphics for sure, but everything else here in this game I think is like very solid, it certainly is one of the most unique games I've seen in the system, wrestling or non-wrestling, regardless. It's certainly is one of the most unique games in the system as far as like, well, they tried doing this and it was mixed results. Yeah. So, I'm definitely happy to. I'm definitely happy to have played it because it's a very interesting game. It's there are other games. There are other games in the system which did kind of like a similar graphical style where there's like 2 bars of action going on in places. But this is the only game I'm aware of that actually has 3 bars of graphics going on. So, like I said, it definitely stands up there as being a very like stand its own standoffish title for sure, because of all that. But anyway, what do you think, Joe? Like overall?
So I mirror everything that you've said. You hit it right on the head. I am just going to point out this game supports the multi-tap. You can play up to 4 people. Yep. I don't think we emphasize that enough.
We didn't emphasize it too much, but
right. But this was very rare at this time in 1994 that you would find a game that supports 4 players.
True.
And also that multi-tap wasn't cheap. So I understand like most people aren't playing 4-player with the multi-tap, but man, if you could afford a multi-tap and get this game with 4 friends, oh my god, this would have been super fun. And I can totally see what you were talking about, like some of the reviews that you saw where like people were having a blast with their friends. This is definitely a game you can play with your friends and have fun with. As far as the single player experience, like I said, I mirror everything that Greg said. And I do think that the wide variety of moves that you have in this game definitely put it up there with some of the games like Raw and Royal Rumble. But that being said, like, give me that graphical style of Raw and Royal Rumble with the depth of this game, and then I think we're talking about a totally different game and one that I would actually really enjoy. I don't want to take away from the animations because that is really what makes this game unique, but also it's really what takes away from it as well. That being said, I mean, if this game's affordable, sure, if you're a collector, go pick it up. But as far as playing it, go play the Famicom version. Most of us have emulators. We're playing the ROMs anyways. Go play the Famicom version because the music that plays while you're wrestling adds so much. It's not even funny. It's actually really good, and I was actually surprised at how well that game was. So
yeah, I couldn't find anything online saying why the music was removed. It's like it had to have been licensed. It had to be. It had to be like a rights issue. There had to be like a licensing issue going on with it or something.
Yeah, and it makes sense.
Taking it out.
Yeah, and it would make sense. You know what I mean? Especially, obviously with the characters they use that clearly look like the superstars that we pointed out. Mm-hmm. There's definitely some tomfoolery going on there. So, just check out the Famicom version and, have this in your back pocket if you end up having some friends over. You got the Raspberry Pi and can support up to 4 players. Definitely do some tag team because that looks like it would be a blast.
Yeah. I did watch tag team match on YouTube, and it's like as a watcher, it's confusing. I'm trying to see everybody like going in and out and see what's going on. I can't imagine actually trying to play it, but I guess over time you get used to trying to handle all this stuff. But
I was going to say, playing a wrestling game with 4 friends already is going to be chaotic. Because I remember like the days of playing like No Mercy and like whatnot for the N64. So I can imagine that some of those tag matches, you have your friends or you doing it to your friends where you're trying to grab the controller from them or try to like bump them and mess up their button, mashing or whatever. Like there's definitely some fun to be had. I instantly got like this envision in my mind of me and like 3 other friends playing this game and just like literally, pushing each other while we're playing because that's just how we were. So yeah. A lot of good memories that could have happened with this game if I had a Super Nintendo back in the day.
I also saw reports from some people, and I totally believe this, that because of everything going on in this game, some people, the action in this game did make some people nauseous.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I definitely could see that because again, there's a lot going on. So one more point about the actual gameplay that I want to bring up to ask you about because I know we mentioned it briefly, but I had the hardest, the biggest frustration I had of this game, and it's something that took me a while to get the hang of it. I'm not sure I ever actually did master 100%. Is like this game's the wrestling moves in this game are very timing based.
Yes,
and because that split-second slowdown that happens because the graphics are never going on, it's really hard to get the hang of the actual gameplay for a while. Eventually I did learn to deal with it, but it's more like you compensate for it and you actually get good at it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's like if it was just more like it wasn't timing based. It was more just like. More like WWF style, punch, kick, they're down.
Right.
That'd be one thing. But it's like, and again, it's like, the Japanese version of the game is what this is basically. It's more styled for Japanese wrestling. And it's like, I get that with it made sense to do it this way in Japan, but it's just like because of the props of the graphics. I assume Japanese players have the same difficulty, but of course I can't read Japanese. I can't find anything going back 30 years ago to think what people thought about this back then. But
so this is the best way I could explain it, and it's kind of this game in a nutshell. So here in the U.S., we have WCW, WWF. Both of those games that came out for both of those companies are very arcadey in a sense, where you can just punch, kick. Occasionally you grapple, then you got to do like that quick button mash to be able to do whatever. In Japanese wrestling, it is a lot about grappling, holds, submissions. It's all about wearing your opponent down. So the idea that you would get into the ring and just start punching and kicking is totally the opposite mindset to have playing the game. So that's why I complained about, the the grapple mechanics and trying to get that down, because until I could get that down, I wasn't getting anywhere. I was getting my butt handed to me because it was all about doing those moves. Like, I kept getting stuck in an arm bar, and I was like, like, why? Like, and I'm just mashing buttons to get out of it. Like, and I don't even know if I'm doing it right. But yeah, so, I mean, that's the big difference between the two. And that's why, I emphasize the fact that I like that the animations are there, because it does tell the story, because that's how Japanese wrestling is. It's all about the story being told in the ring through those slow, methodical moves and wearing your opponent down. Whereas here in the U.S., it's everything's bigger. So it's like, it's all explosive,
But I would have I enjoy both styles of wrestling games. Don't get me wrong. It's like, just that the problem with this game, the biggest problem with this game as far as the gameplay goes, is the timing based required here is made it's more difficult because the graphical choices and interface that's to use. It's used. Yeah. So again, a very curious design choice. All we've been saying all this episode is a very curious design choice. Because it really is. It really is. When I say this is a very unique game, I mean it. Yeah. Like, I really, really mean how unique this game is on many levels. So, but it's like, will I go back to it? Probably not. But like Joe said, if you have friends to play it with, you definitely should give it a shot, because I think nowadays you to have some fun with it. But so as I mentioned before, this is a small print run, and the print run, this being a wrestling game, but it did not get a lot of attention. A couple magazines gave it attention, but really the only big publication that actually gave a review was GamePro, and GamePro said all the same things about the game we've already talked about before on this. Sadly, there's no score given here, so I don't know what the actual score was that they gave the game. The contemporary reviews of this game online usually, I usually think around the 3 out of 5 star range, which feels right to me. But so, and like I said before, this game's pretty uncommon on eBay. It can be found, but it's not super common. But again, because as I said, nobody knows about this game. Prices of this game are pretty cheap.
Right.
I found doing research. Let me mention here real quick also. Because the Japanese version of this game had a sound test mode where you can listen to all the music and sound effects out of the game. Obviously, because the music was all stripped out of the US version of this game, that password was also that function was also taken out. Yeah. So except for the title match passwords, there are no bonuses or cheat codes or anything present like that in this game. But anyway, eBay. When I was doing research, 16 copies of this game were currently be listed for sale. 8 copies of the game are recently sold. So uncommon, but you can't find it. These prices are pretty typical Super NES prices. These prices include shipping for North American-based copies only. You can pick up a cart owning this game for anywhere on average for anywhere between $20 and $25.
That's actually not bad.
And CIV copies of the game are not that bad either. They range from $50 to $75. So, like I said, for a common game, it's pretty affordable.
Yeah.
Because I said nobody probably knows about this game.
Right.
Did not get a lot of attention. The attention like when it came out, for one reason or another. I didn't check to see when wrestling games system came out, but as Joe mentioned, there already were wrestling games out of the system by this point. Yeah. So and this being a small print run, and Jalco, while they were a respectable publisher in those days, were not the biggest gaming company either. So probably got overlooked for that reason only. Yeah. Jalco's bread and butter was mostly sports games, and some other like more niche games. But anyway, just probably just did not get a lot of shelf space to begin with. So some of their sports games that they made over the years do sound pretty good. Some of these games I'm curious to check out because they also made Racket Attack, a tennis game for the NES. There were a number of basketball games, soccer games. There was also they did other wrestling games like in Japan only. There was a rally racing game that they did. Hockey game. There was also like a boxing game which was arcade only. There was a football game and a football game. Like I also made a pool game for the PS2, Xbox, Windows, and GameCube, which actually looks pretty good. So yeah, so when I say when I say the Jowker's bread and butter was sports games, I mean sports games.
Yeah.
Of course, there was also they're best known for the whole Bases Loaded series, which we've already talked about. We've already talked about the Super NES baseball games here, but they did a lot of other sports games too. Is my point. So they really. So that's like those games really like what they're like probably you're probably like best known for,
right.
But. Anyway, so and the guy who this game was based, the guy whose name appeared in the Japanese version of the game. I was reading his. So I don't know how much you know about him, Joe, but I was reading his Wikipedia article before the podcast, and he was pretty good. He started doing super wrestling when he was just like 13 years old.
Yeah. At one point, he was one of the most popular Japanese wrestlers in the country. So yeah, he was at the top of his game.
He's still alive today, by the way. He's 74 years old now.
I bet he's not getting in the ring.
No, he retired 2015.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, that was a long time in the ring though, because like he did sumo. Because he did sumo wrestling. He already doing the math here. He started sumo wrestling from 1963, and then he transitioned over to wrestling, like All Japan Pro Wrestling League in 1976.
Yeah.
So from 1976 to 2015, he was wrestling. That's almost. That's like. It's like almost 40 years in the ring. That's a long career.
Yeah, I mean that's how they are. I mean Antonio Inoki, who founded all Japan Pro Wrestling, he wrestled from 1960 to 1998, and then he had one match after that, but like actively wrestling every day, year after year, for almost 40 years. So I mean that's just how the Japanese wrestlers are, man. When you're not having to dive off top ropes and do, crazy headbutts and things like that, you can have a pretty long wrestling career. Like I said, there's a reason they focus on the grappling and submissions and things of that nature, because, I mean, it's not that way now. Now it's totally different. It's a lot of high impact stuff. But the older wrestlers were able to, take it easy, quote unquote, and be able to, have some longevity.
Right. So. Oh, also, trivia note, Tenryu is one of several Japanese wrestlers who also makes a cameo, the video game Yakuza Kiwami 2 as gang members, which came in 2017. So that's pretty cool.
That is.
That's the remake of Yakuza 2.
Yeah.
I've not played the game yet myself, and we'll get there eventually. I'm sure I wouldn't have recognized him, but yeah, he and several other wrestlers are present in the game. As a cameo. So, but that's pretty. That's pretty cool. Curiously enough, he was also trained by several American wrestlers back in the day, also, which is very interesting. The Funk Boys, like Dory Funk.
Oh yeah.
Dory Funk Jr. and Terry Funk trained him back in the day. So it's interesting how American wrestlers that are trained Japanese wrestlers.
I mean, that makes sense because at that time, in the 70s, they would have been out in Japan, Wrestling, they were doing their deathmatch stuff, so that makes 100%
There are
sense.
still there are still foreigners wrestling Japan these days, though, right?
Oh yeah, there's a lot more now than there ever was before.
Yeah, that's what I thought. You just don't hear about them.
Yeah, and Japanese wrestlers are, finally coming over here and getting some recognition through AEW. And WWF has signed, or WWE, sorry, has signed some, All Japan Pro Wrestling talent in recent years, but not as much as AEW. AEW currently has a partnership with them, so they trade off talent left and right. So it's actually really, really cool. Actually, little side note, I actually went and saw a taping of AEW on Thursday night with Norma, and we got to see a couple Japanese wrestlers, which he of course had no idea who they were, and I was going nuts because I did not expect to see any of those guys ever live, because it's so rare for All Japan Pro Wrestling to bring people over here and wrestle. So I was pretty hyped. So
yeah, that's cool. But and nowadays because like streaming and everything, it's a lot easier to be able to do matches and whatnot too as well, because sports don't need to be native. Sports do not need to be native to their own country anymore. Because in the old days, it was very hard to watch Japanese wrestling or American football or like British soccer if you weren't in that country. Nowadays you can easily find like a CD, like a CD internet to watch it, which I'm sure also does which has also really helped to expand the appeal and broaden the fan base like the sports as well. So
yeah, and I love, as much as I harping on how horrible social media can be sometimes, I love the fact that I can go on YouTube and pull up just about any Japanese wrestling match that's happened in the past 10 to 15 years and say, this is why I watch Japanese wrestling, and can just, have someone watch a 5-minute match and totally see, why, the sport is different there than it is here. And that's, something that most people don't talk about, is how different yet the same it really is.
Yeah. But yeah, which you've already articulated for in past podcasts, so we're not going to like bore the listener like any further here. But anyway, yeah. So probably it's a shame that they had to strip so much of this. It's a shame they had to strip so much of this game when it came over to the States. But I understand. But I also understand why they did it, because. Anyway, I think we can wrap this up here. So thank you very much for tuning in to us, as always. We are covering another light and easy game next time on the podcast. He's already previously alluded to. We're going to be covering. I believe this was my suggestion. I don't remember anymore at this point. We're covering another bowling game, Brunswick World. It's been about a year since we covered the last bowling game on the system. So Brunswick World is a very different game than that other bowling game. So it's much more. I've already played a bit of it. It's much more, I guess, serious professional game than the other. Then more, which is fine. There's time and place for both serious and also like more casual gameplay style. So we'll get into it again next time. But anyway, as always, we appreciate you being here. If you have any questions, comments, feedback, etc., feel free to leave on our Facebook page, or you can also send me an email directly to the SNES podcast yahoo.com. Joe, where can they reach you at?
So I have a very public Facebook still, so you can find me there. Obviously not family friendly. Also, I do the Radical Retro Roundup. Again, not family friendly. But you can find that on Facebook. Also, I think I've gotten it to the point where if you Google Radical Retro Roundup, it is one of the first 3 options. I think it shows all 8 different places that you can listen to it. It's pretty much everywhere. Any kind of podcast listening app you have outside of iTunes or Spotify. I think we can even get it on Spotify. Pretty much anywhere you can get podcasts, you can get it. So, but like I said, definitely not family friendly. We recently recorded an episode on Ninja Shadow of Darkness, which was an interesting game for sure. We are going to look at Road and Track presents The Need for Speed for the 3DO next time.
That's where the franchise got its start, I think. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So he was like, "Oh, I want to do Need for Speed," and I was like, "Oh, are we doing PlayStation, Saturn?" And he was like, "No, I want to do the original for the 3DO." He's like, "There's full motion video," and I was like, "Yeah, there is." So
very grainy 24-bit style.
Yeah. So I was.
I played it. Yeah, I actually did play that back. I actually did play the friend's house back in the day, and at the time I remember it being like a pretty good racing game. I'm not sure how it holds up today, but
yeah. So I had a 3DO in the early '90s that I had gotten off a friend, and that was one of the games I had other than Dragon's Lair. So I played a lot of those two games, and that all I can remember are those cheesy full motion videos. But nobody ever talks about that game. They always talk about the PlayStation or the Saturn version, which is just your generic racing game. They stripped all those full motion videos.
But the 3DO they were going to start at.
Yeah. So because it's 3DO, it had to have full motion video. So that's a podcast in its own right there.
Yep.
But and also I'm still on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, at JOESUX30. And I guess if you want to look for the Radical Retro Roundup handle there, it's retro_roundup. And yeah, that's it.
Right. Okay. Sounds good then. So all right, folks, as always, thank you for being here. Stay safe, everybody. Be well. We'll catch you again later. Bye.
Bye.
Nintendo controls 80% of the video market. But no matter how you play the game, or which game you play, things definitely have come a long way since Pac-Man.
Now you're playing with power. Super power.